There's a special kind of magic that only a few entertainers ever touch, and Stan Laurel had it. With just a tilt of his head or a twitch of his lip, make millions burst into laughter. Yet behind those timeless performances, Stan's own story was one of deep heartbreak, rare near misses, and battles few ever saw coming. One stunning loss shattered his world, the passing of his young son, a grief he carried quietly as he wore a smiling face for the cameras. Before we descend into the shadows of his life, let's step into the vibrant beginnings that made Stan Laurel a legend whose impact refuses to fade. Born Arthur Stanley Jefferson on June 16, 1890, in the modest town of Ulverston, England, Stan's early life was anything but conventional. His parents, both immersed in the whirl of theater life, couldn't offer the typical upbringing. Instead, young Stan found a safe haven with his grandparents, George and Sarah Metcalf, in a home just steps away from the bustling Holy Trinity Church. Every Sunday's trip to church and sweet visits to Gillam's General Store, where he fell in love with trickle toffee, etched small but lasting joys into his boyhood memories. Little did anyone suspect that the child tugging on his grandmother's skirts would one day change the face of comedy forever. Stan's world swirled with the sounds of theater from his earliest days. Across the street from his grandparents' house stood the wooden-roofed Hippodrome Theater, where his parents performed, and where young Stan caught his first glimpses of storytelling magic. It wasn't long before the scent of grease paint and the glow of stage lights burrowed into his soul. But life had other plans too. In 1910, the Hippodrome burned down, a brutal reminder that nothing in show business or life was permanent. Yet that same year, a fresh chapter began as Stan set sail for America, unknowingly moving closer to immortality. Stan's educational years at schools like King James I Grammar and the King's School were quickly overshadowed when his family relocated to Glasgow. There, his father managed the Metropole Theatre, and it was on that very stage that 16-year-old Stan took his first leap into the spotlight. There was no turning back after that moment. While some teenagers dreamed of steady jobs, Stan saw a different future, making the world laugh, one stumble and pratfall at a time. In 1910, destiny struck a second time. Stan joined Fred Karno's vaudeville troupe, adopting the stage name Stan Jefferson. Here, among all the stage hopefuls, he crossed paths with another young dreamer, Charlie Chaplin. Imagine being a fly on the wall, watching two future comedy icons trying to out-fumble each other in slapstick routine. Stan even became Chaplin's understudy, a badge of honor in a world where talent fought tooth and nail for survival. When they sailed to America together, the seeds of silent film history had already been planted. Yet Stan's journey was never straightforward. Though he registered for military service during World War I, deafness in one ear and his status as a British resident meant he was spared the front line. Instead, he threw himself deeper into the world of laughter. When the Karno troupe eventually disbanded in 1914, Stan refused to let disappointment sink in. Teaming up with fellow comics Edgar and Ethel Hurley, he became part of the Keystone Trio, a traveling comedy act inspired by the wildly popular Keystone Cops. It was here that Stan first began molding his iconic character, testing routines, sharpening timing, and paying homage to Chaplin while still finding his own voice. By 1916, with new partners Alice and Baldwin Cook, the Stan Jefferson Trio was born. These were friendships that would outlast the fleeting fame of most vaudeville acts. However, the real game changer came in 1921, when Stan briefly worked with a rotund, dapper performer named Oliver Hardy. Their collaboration on the short film The Lucky Dog gave the world a fleeting glimpse of a chemistry that would later take over Hollywood and steal its heart. Amidst the career-building hustle, superstition found its way in. Actress May Dalberg, a companion and sometimes co-star, pointed out that Stan Jefferson had an unlucky 13 letters, never one to tempt fate. Stan swapped it out for Stan Laurel, a change that felt like shedding old skin and stepping into destiny. A smart move, because not long after, a juicy $75 a week offer rolled in to star in two reel comedy. It wasn't a king's ransom, but it was a start, and Stan grabbed it with both hands. Yet as every rising star learns, Hollywood's promises come with fine print. His first contract with Universal Studios crumbled almost as soon as it began, victim to internal shakeup. But Stan wasn't a man who wallowed. Teaming up with May Dalberg, he churned out early silent hits like Mud and Sand. a parody that proved even early Hollywood loved poking fun at itself. By 1924, Stan's star truly began to ascend. Signing with producer Joe Rock to create 12 two-reelers, Stan found himself with steady work, but at a cost. Rock insisted May Dalberg stay away from the production, convinced that her fiery temperament was holding Stan back. In a deal that Hollywood tales are made of, May was paid off and sent back to Australia, leaving Stan free to chase bigger dreams. The mid-1920s saw Stan flexing new muscles behind the camera, directing or co-directing 10 silent shorts. Though he didn't always act in them, guess who did? Oliver Hardy, appearing in films like Yes, Yes, Nanette, Wandering Papa, and Madam Mystery, gradually weaving his path closer to laurels once more. And while fans loved the laughter, Stan's growing success allowed him to indulge in life's finer things. Over the years, he amassed a modest yet stylish collection of luxury vehicles, favoring sleek 1920s Cadillac that matched his quiet sophistication. Timepieces were another quiet passion. Stan was often seen sporting understated but elegant pocket watch, the symbol of a gentleman who respected tradition. His investments remained cautious but clever, dabbling in Los Angeles real estate and securing solid insurance policies that covered his assets and career. A rare move for an entertainer during a time when many stars lived paycheck to paycheck. From these smart moves, one enduring lesson shines. True greatness isn't just about talent, it's about safeguarding your future. When the spotlight inevitably dimmed, when Stan and Oliver teamed up for Get Him Young, something clicked in a way no studio executive could have planned. Audiences didn't just laugh, they connected. It wasn't long before they shared the screen in short films like Duck Soup, Flipping Wives, and With Love and Hisses. Their chemistry was so magnetic that director Leo McCarey took a gamble, pairing them permanently. It wasn't a rip, it was a revelation. By late 1927, Laurel and Hardy weren't just a duo, they were a phenomenon. And just when you think success can't get bigger, they stormed into the golden age of silent films with masterpieces like The Battle of the Century, Should Married Men Go Home, and Big Business. Their rhythm was pure magic, an invisible thread of timing and trust that no studio could manufacture. Even the seismic shift to talking pictures in 1929 couldn't derail them. Their first sound film, Unaccustomed as We Are, was a smash, and soon they graced the big screen in MGM's The Hollywood Review of 1929, dazzling fans all over again. By 1931, Laurel and Hardy launched their first full-length starring feature, Pardon Up, further cementing their place among Hollywood royalty. They weren't just making movies, they were building a legacy. But behind the scenes, not everything was as picture-perfect as it seemed. As the 1930s marched on, cracks started to show. Stan and Hal Roach, once collaborators, found themselves at odds. Roach's clever tactic of signing Laurel and Hardy under separate contract created tension that boiled over when Laurel's contract expired before Hardy. While Hardy was pushed into awkward partnerships with other comedians like Harry Langdon and Zenobia, Laurel fought back, suing Roach, and signaling the beginning of the end for their golden era together. By 1941, the duo left Roach for good, striking a new deal with 20th Century Fox. It sounded promising, 10 films across 5 years, but there was a catch. Laurel and Hardy were hired as mere actors, stripped of the creative control they once thrived on. For men who lived to craft every beat of their comedy, it was a tough pill to swallow. Still, they pressed on, injecting their signature humor whenever they could. Audiences still adored them, even if the spark behind the scenes had to flicker a little harder to stay alive. But fate, once again, was preparing a cruel twist. On August 7, 1957, Oliver Hardy passed away, and with him, half of the world's most beloved comedy team vanished. The news hit Stan like a blow no slapstick fall could soften. Too ill to attend the funeral, he whispered, "Babe would understand." A heartbreakingly simple tribute to a bond so deep it transcended word. Offers poured in for Stan to return to performing, but he turned everyone down. For him, the stage without Hardy was just an empty echo. He chose silence over an act that could never be whole again. Financially, Laurel's career seemed golden, but real life told a different story. Despite decades of fame, his net worth at the peak of his career was surprisingly modest, hovering around $500,000. A fortune then, but modest by Hollywood standards. Yet Stan was never extravagant. His real estate holdings were smart, not flashy. including a cozy Santa Monica home and a few rental properties around Los Angeles. Today, adjusting for inflation, his net worth at death would equal roughly $5 million. Small compared to today's celebrity empire, but a testament to his careful planning. Had Stan lived in today's world of syndication and streaming royalties, financial experts estimate his legacy would have easily surpassed $50 million. Stan wasn't a flashy spender. His taste in luxury leaned toward understated quality. His cars, mostly Cadillacs and Packards, were symbols of old Hollywood elegance, rather than wild extravagance. He was rarely seen without a finely crafted pocket watch, preferring simple Swiss designs over flamboyant displays of wealth. Private jets weren't part of his story, but he did love sea travel, often booking first-class voyages to Europe. Stan also had extensive insurance coverage, rare for his era, including health insurance, real estate policy, and performance protections that safeguarded his career earnings. The financial lesson Laurel's life leaves us with is powerful. Fame fade, but smart, steady investment create real security. Rather than chasing every fad or pouring money into risky ventures, he stayed grounded. Even as Hollywood's landscape shifted around him, Stan made sure he had foundations strong enough to weather the storm. Yet even Stan's wise planning couldn't shield him from personal heartbreak. His complicated relationship history painted a chaotic picture. He never formally married his first partner, May Dahlberg, but they lived together from 1919 to 1925. When studio executives forced them apart, it planted seeds of resentment that would bloom years later. In 1937, amid a messy divorce from his second wife, Dahlberg returned with a lawsuit, demanding financial support. It was an ugly public affair, one that threatened to overshadow the joyful persona millions associated with his name. But the most crushing moment came long before legal battle. In May 1930, Stan and his then-wife, Lois Nielsen, faced every parent's worst nightmare. Their baby son, Robert, passed away shortly after birth. The pain of that loss left a wound Stan carried quietly for the rest of his life. To the world, he was the man who made them laugh until they cried. Behind closed doors, he was a father who never stopped grieving a life that barely had a chance to begin. Still, Stan refused to let sorrow define him. He poured his heart into his work, creating characters and scenes that outlived his own era. His journey wasn't about perfection, it was about perseverance. It was about finding meaning in the laughter, even when his own world was falling apart. The world knew Stan Laurel as a master of comedy, but few realized the heavy burdens he carried off-screen. A devastating chapter in his personal life came when his first wife, Lois Nielsen, gave birth to their second child, Stanley Robert Laurel. Born 2 months premature, tiny Stanley fought bravely but tragically passed away just 9 days later. Imagine a man who had spent his entire career making others laugh, carrying a grief so profound he almost never spoke of it again. This heartbreak became a silent shadow behind every smile he shared with the world. In a pattern that echoed the turbulence inside him, Laurel's personal life spiraled into a chaotic loop of marriages and remarriages. After ending things with Lois in 1934, he swiftly married Virginia Ruth Rogers a year later. Yet, he confessed, his heart still yearned for Lois. Unfortunately, she had moved on. Then came a stormy and scandalous marriage to Ilana Shuvalova, culminating in outlandish accusations that seemed ripped from a wild screenplay. That marriage collapsed in 1940, leaving behind only headlines. Hooked once again by nostalgia or habit, he remarried Virginia Ruth Rogers, only to divorce her again in 1946. In the same year, he finally found a lasting companion in Ida Kitaiva Raphael, who stayed by his side until the end. Hidden behind Laurel's public antics was a man who had endured enough heartbreak to sink a lesser soul. The curtain may have fallen on the iconic Laurel and Hardy partnership. Stan Laurel's spirit never truly left the stage. After retreating from the spotlight, he lived humbly, far removed from the glitz of Hollywood mansions. His home was a simple, modest flat at the Oceana Apartments in Santa Monica. Fame had never hardened him. If anything, it made him even more approachable. In a gesture almost unthinkable today, he kept his phone number listed publicly and often answered calls from adoring fans himself. Imagine dialing a legend's number and actually hearing him pick up the phone, chatting as though you were an old friend. One of the most stirring moments came in 1961, when the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences awarded him an honorary Oscar for his pioneering work in cinema comedy. Frail and unable to attend, Laurel watched from afar as Bob Hope introduced the award and Danny Kaye accepted it on his behalf. It was more than an accolade. It was a moment that sealed his status as an eternal master of laughter. It's often said that the true worth of a legend isn't in their award, but in the love they inspire, and Stan Laurel had an abundance of both. Comedians who owed him so much never forgot. Jerry Lewis, deeply inspired by Laurel, wove his comedic essence into the bellboy, even naming the main character Stanley. Dick Van Dyke, another future icon, cold-called Laurel, was invited over and later paid tribute to him on The Dick Van Dyke Show. These weren't mere nods of admiration. They were admissions that their artistry bore Laurel's fingerprint. Sometimes, the greatest teachers never set foot in a classroom. They live on through every artist they touch. Director Stanley Kramer once extended an invitation for Laurel to appear alongside other comedic giants in It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. Out of loyalty to Hardy, and perhaps a fear of being seen aged and alone, Laurel declined. Yet even then, subtle tributes found their way in, with Jack Benny ultimately wearing Laurel's iconic hat in the final cut. Loyalty, it seems, was one of Laurel's last standing jokes, never lost on those who knew him best. Financially, Stan Laurel's story is a fascinating contradiction. Though he starred in nearly 190 films, he never amassed the kind of vast wealth associated with modern superstars. At the peak of his career, his earnings were respectable, but frequent divorces, legal battles, and poor financial advice gnawed at his savings. His real estate holdings were modest. His Santa Monica apartment, valued then at a fraction of modern prices, sits in a prime coastal neighborhood where similar flats easily fetch for $1.5 million. Throughout his life, Laurel preferred classic practical cars, favoring Packards and modest Cadillacs over flashier models. As for luxury watches, there are rare photos suggesting he preferred simple, understated styles rather than extravagant brands like Rolex or Patek Philippe. He never owned private jets or grandiose estates. His wealth was in his relationships, not possessions. Though Laurel never pursued major business ventures, his influence created opportunities that others monetized heavily. The estate, managed wisely after his death, now commands licensing deals that continue to generate revenue. Modern-day estimates place the Laurel and Hardy brand value in the multi-millions, though Laurel himself saw little of that fortune in his lifetime. Financial lesson: never underestimate the power of protecting your creative legacy. Sometimes it's worth more than any paycheck. Insurance records suggest Laurel maintained basic health and life coverage, but didn't leverage the massive insurance policies that modern celebrities use to safeguard their brands and bodies. It was a different era, and Laurel lived more simply, betting more on laughter than on long-term financial planning. As the 1960s drew to a close, Laurel's health rapidly declined. In early 1965, an infection was discovered, leading to a series of tests and treatments. Then, in February, he suffered a heart attack. Just days later, he passed away quietly in his armchair. No dramatic farewell, just a silent exit from a world he had once filled with uproarious joy. Sometimes, the loudest voices leave on the softest steps, and yet their echoes never fade. His funeral at the Church of the Hills was a gathering of genuine admirers, not a star-studded spectacle. Dick Van Dyke, who had grown so close to Laurel, delivered a moving eulogy, remembering not just the comedian, but the human being. Buster Keaton, another legend, attended, recognizing a true master of the craft. Laurel was laid to rest at Forest Lawn, Hollywood Hills Cemetery, but his spirit, his impact, was already immortal. Stan Laurel didn't just build a career, he built a blueprint for timeless laughter. In a world that changes faster than a punchline, true brilliance, like Stan Laurel's, remains ageless. His journey from the grand stages of Hollywood to a modest apartment, from roaring laughter to quiet grace, reminds us that real greatness often shines brightest when the curtains fall. From heartbreak to Hollywood legend, Stan Laurel showed us laughter's true power. Hit like, comment your favorite moment, and subscribe, because the next story might just change your day.